right, so welcome everyone. My name is Adie Filson. I am the Mobility Education Coordinator with the Community Development Department for the City of Cambridge. And today, today's workshop will be an in-depth look at AIR. For anyone that's been attending the past few workshops, we have our ABC, what we call our ABC Quick Check, which is a literally quick check to see if our bikes are safe to ride. And just to recap that quickly, we check A for air. So giving the tires a quick squeeze. These, I don't know if you can tell, but they're pretty squishy. Definitely, they still have air in them, but definitely too squishy to ride. B for brakes. So I'm not gonna flip this bike back over, but giving each of your brakes a squeeze to make sure that they work. And C for chain. Basically making sure that your chain is on, it's in good condition. This is not in good condition because this back wheel won't turn because it's a little broken right now. So, and quick is actually not just because it's quick, but also we have quick releases. You'll see here, and you'll want to make sure those are in the closed position and that they're tight so that when they're closed, you can't rotate them like I am now. Awesome. So the next couple Tuesday lunch and learns will be focusing on the different ABC parts of the ABC Quick Check. And like I said, today we'll be focusing on air, and we'll look at everything from how to change a flat tire to different parts of the wheel. And with that, so first thing is when we're checking air, something that a lot of people don't actually know is that on the sides of your tires, it will tell you how much air needs to go in your tires. A lot of people think that you can just fill up your tires to where they feel hard and then they're good to go. It's pretty hard to, unless you put a lot of time into training yourself, what your tires should feel like, your specific set of tires should feel like. It's pretty hard to know just by touch if your tires are good, have enough air pressure or not. And that's because every tire is rated to its own air pressure. So this tire, for example, will be different than this tire. And some of it has to do with the wider the tire, the lower the pressure. You can think of like car tires have will be much lower in terms of pressure than these. The units that we use here in the US are PSI, pounds per square inch. And so if you all have a bike at home and can take a look at it, you'll want to look on the sidewall of your tires for a couple different things they'll provide. Not only the PSI. We'll start off with that one. Let's see if I can find it on here. Cool. I don't want to walk. So, might be pretty hard to see, but it says inflate to, I can't read this upside down, 40 to 65 PSI. So some tires will give you a range, and some tires will give you a maximum. You never want to go up to the maximum of here, in this case it's 65, because if you do go to the maximum, you risk blowing your tube, especially if you inflate your tires in a cooler environment, and then you go outside and you leave your bike in the hot weather, the pressure in your tires can change with temperature, and so you want to leave yourself some wiggle room. So ideally you want to be somewhere between the minimum and the maximum. The closer you are to the maximum, the faster you'll go, and the closer you are to the minimum, the more like cushy of a ride you'll have. So my rule that I go by is generally 5 to 10 PSI less than the maximum. I like the extra speed. But if you're riding over like rocky or terrain or dirt, something that's like a little like sandy or looser, usually people recommend a little lower than that. Cool. So another thing about this tire is that we'll also tell you the size. And there's a couple numbers here. Actually, this one conveniently, you can actually see it pretty well. So this first number, 26, and then 1.59. And that first number, 26, is the size of the wheel. And then, so the wheel this way. And then that second number is the width of the tire. So here. So if you ever need to change a flat and you need to buy a tube, here, pictured here, it sits inside the tire, you'll need to know a couple things. One thing is the size of the wheel, which in this case, the first number is always the size of the wheel, so that's 26. The next thing you'll need to know is the size of the width of the tire itself. So in this case, we'll look at that again. Let's see if we can get this up and close. 1.95. The other thing you'll need to know is what kind of valve. So these two different tubes, you'll see this tube is much skinnier, this tube is much fatter. They're drastically different sizes because they're for different wheels. And they also have different valves. This valve here, this also has a longer valve length, so don't be fooled. But you'll notice it has this little nub on top, and it screws and unscrews when it's screwed all the way closed. This is its resting position, and then if you want to inflate or deflate, you have to open it this way. And you don't want to unscrew the nub all the way off. You see it just sits at the very top, and it's loose like that. When you press it, if there's air in it, air will come out. This is called a Presta valve. One way to remember it is Presta press. You press on it. Yeah, but at this point you can either put air in or take air out. These are Schrader valves. You'll see them more so on mountain bikes and kids bikes. These you'll see more on bikes that need higher pressure, kind of like performance bikes, road bikes, anything like that. The Schrader valve has a pin inside, you can see, and you can take, in order to let air out, you can press on that pin, let's see, just like that with the edge of something. You can use like a pen, whatever really gets in there. So let's see, so far we have how we need to know size of the wheel, width of the tire. The tubes will come in ranges of sizes. So for a road bike, you'll often see 700, the wheel size will be 700. And you'll see here, this 28 to 32 is the wheel size. So the wheels that I have on the bike that I bought this for are a 32, so that fits within this range. These can be a little forgiving if you need to use like a slightly different size tube because you're stuck somewhere and that's all you have. Then you know, they are able to accommodate some extra stretch or being a little bit larger. However, I don't recommend. That's like only in quick fix scenarios. I would never ride for long periods of time for tubes that aren't sized for your given wheel. So once we know the wheel size, let me just double check, make sure there's no comments so far. Awesome. So once we know the wheel size, the tire diameter, the type of valve, the other thing, the last piece of information is the valve length. And that is because if you take a look at this wheel, you'll notice the size of the rim here, that measurement versus this distance here. The valve has to go through much more rim here than it does on this wheel. So this wheel would need a much smaller valve length than this one. So that is really important information that you'll need if you ever need to go to a bike shop to pick up the tube. And you'll notice how long this valve is. This valve would actually probably be suitable for this bike here. So these are actually probably the same valve sizes. Whereas if I were to put this, where's the, here we go. If I was to put this, it looks like the rim tape is shifted over. Might not work for the moment. If I was to put this through here, it would be very, very long, which isn't the worst thing in the world, as long as it's not too short. If it comes up being too short, as you can imagine, and I've definitely had to do this when I've borrowed a friend's tube when I had a flat and forgot to bring one with me. The issue is that the pump head will not be able to load directly onto, it'll be hard to get the pump head to load entirely onto the valve. So you want to it is really important to make sure that you have relatively the right length valve. So I see a question, what does a 700 stand for? That is an excellent question. And in fact, I found this awesome diagram showing you. So let me share my screen with you. I think it is this one. Awesome. So the 700 is the terminology for the size of a certain wheel type. And you'll see in this image, you won't actually see 700. 700 corresponds to this 29-inch wheel. And this is all going, there's so much confusion in the nomenclature for wheel sizing that it's almost just better to think of the wheel sizes as sort of, or the the names of wheels as sort of like arbitrary names. There are such thing as 29-inch wheels. Most road bikes will use 700C wheels, which have the same measurement, the 622. But as you can see here, this also has the same measurement of 622, and that's the internal diameter. But as you can see, there's also the external, or the bead seat diameter, or sorry, there's, yeah, the bead seat diameter and then the outside diameter. So this outside diameter is different. And so that's what can make a difference between having a 29-inch plus and a 29. You'll see this first tire that I used was for a 26-inch wheel. So that was like a common old mountain bike tire size. And a lot of like kids bikes will have 26. The 650B, you'll notice doesn't really correspond to any of these measurements. You could commonly think of it as like a 27.5. The old road bikes will have 27-inch wheels. So the important thing is to look at your tires, figure out which size wheel you have from that, and just remember that. And if you have a road bike, it's pretty standard that they'll be 700. With mountain bikes, it'll be a bit different, and especially if there's a youth bike, a lot of times as you progress in age, the sizes of the wheels will increase. So anywhere from like a 16-inch wheel up to like a 26-inch wheel, you'll still see 26-inch wheels on youth bikes. So I know that's a little bit confusing. So if anyone has more questions about that, feel free to ask in the Q&A. So you'll notice that tires will come in a lot of different types. You'll see there's like this knobby tire, which is really great, has some extra traction, or you'll have, this is more of a slick tire. The slicker the tire, the faster rolling it is. So you'll see if you're doing any sort of like, mostly like road riding, especially especially for speed, you'll see really slick tires. And then these are more, mountain bike type tires. They can handle a little bit more. You can ride them in the city too, but they'll be a little heavier and they'll drag more. So on the box when it said 700, did that refer to outside diameter or inside or something else? That, just think of 700 as the name of the name of the wheel size. Like it could, just because it's a number, it makes you want to think of it as some sort of measurement. It's just kind of at this point become abstracted from those measurements. So yeah, I would just think of it as like a name, as if it was like, I don't know, like the dragon tire or the dragon wheel or something. Like it's just it's really at this point sort of an arbitrary name. Okay, great. I know that's not I know it's like a whole science to it. So great. Actually, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. Cool. So down to the important stuff. When you need to change a wheel or a tire or flat, how do you know when you need to change that? So Obviously, if you have a flat tire, you know that the tube will probably need to be changed. But something that's really important when you pull out the tube is to take a look at the tube itself, because it will tell you, it'll give you some hints as to why the tire went flat in the first place. And I have some examples here, but I'm thinking it'll be better to show you, to share my screen one more time. And share screen. Great. So here we go. Here's a recap of when you're choosing a tube. Remember valve type, valve length, wheel size, tire diameter, as you've seen here. Okay, types of flats. This will save you a lot of grief. Checking to make sure, usually if you're like pull over the side of the road with a flat tire, you're probably on the way somewhere. Oftentimes you just want to, you know, put another tube in and not, and just be on your way. However, if there's any sort of debris in your tire, if it's like a puncture from the road, it's possible that whatever it is still in the tire. If it's, you know, something got on the inside of the tire and there's, you know, something sharp on the inside, you'll need to know that. So taking a little bit of time when you're changing a flat and figuring out what caused the flat is super important. I've definitely had friends that have, you know, you're impatient, you just put another, either that or you, sometimes it's a little tricky to find what caused the flat, and you just, you know, put another tube in, and then a couple minutes later you got another flat and no longer have a new tube, another tube to replace it with. So the ways that you can think about it here, as I've outlined here, are under whether or not the flat is caused by a puncture on the underside or the top side. What I'll do is I will take the tube and I'll fill it with some air, probably, especially if it's punctured and it's leaking fast, probably more air than I would otherwise put into it. So it'll like blow it up like a balloon. I'll go over how to actually put air in the tires in a second. Actually, this tire has such a big hole that it's not going to hold air. So I'm going to do this one instead. So this is probably bigger than I would want to inflate this tube otherwise, but it gives you that extra leeway, especially if air is leaking out fast. Some people will especially if you're at home and you have like a bowl of water or like a tub of water, especially if you add a little bit of soap. So you can dip the tube in there and kind of squeeze around and look for bubbles to come out. That will show you, especially if you have a slow leak, it's a really good way of finding a slow leak. And in fact, probably only one of the only ways you'll be able to find a slow leak, because they're so hard to find otherwise. However, when you're on the side of a road, especially if you have a bigger hole, what I like to do is hold it right across my cheek and by my ear, and I'll kind of squeeze and I'll rotate the tube like this. Your face is super sensitive, right? So you have a lot of sensory endings. And the great thing about this is I'm listening at the same time as I'm sensing if I feel any air coming out of my face. Once I locate the once I locate the puncture here, I want to make sure, I want to check, is it on the top side or the underside? And the underside is always a side with a valve. And if you think about it, this tube does not go with this wheel, but so if you think about it, this tube would be sitting on top of the rim like this. So already we know if the tube has a puncture on the underside, it probably has something to do with this rim. So a couple things, you can see the snake bite or pinch flat. You'll see that it looks sort of like a snake bit into it with two fangs. That is caused by underinflation. So the sides of the tire will pinch the tube against the rim, and that's why you get a snake bite pinch flat. And those are actually one of the most common types of flats. A lot of times, flats are caused from people just not having enough air in their tires. Their tires will still feel relatively firm, but at the same time, when you're putting your weight on it, the tube can get pinched, and that's when you get the snake bite pinch flat. If you take your tire off and are looking at your tube and find that has a snake bite pinch flat, that's like super easy. You know that your tire was underinflated, and you can just put a tube back in and proceed onwards. If there's a hole, just a single hole in the bottom, it's possible it could still be a pinch flat, but as you'll see in the middle here, it can also be a rim strip failure. And I've definitely had this before. Something that your wheel should have is, stop sharing for a second so you can see this, is this rim tape. And you'll see these circles here, that's covering where the spokes go in. And a lot of time this rim tape can shift over. You can either, this will like blow through and you'll just get a hole there, and you can get a puncture from the tube on the edges of that, or the rim tape can just like completely shift over so that a side of it is exposed or something, or something like that. So another thing that you can do is just go around and check to make sure your rim tape is intact. And the other thing that's on the underside is the valve itself. If you overinflate your tube, or this used to happen to me a lot, I'd inflate my I'd inflate my tires to relatively pretty close to the maximum. And then I'd leave my bike in the summer in the hot sun while I was working all day. It caused the air pressure in the tire to expand, so it's beyond the maximum, and I would get holes right around the valve. So a lot of times you'll see them, this one doesn't have it, but you'll see it like right here, anywhere right around here, or like really close to the valve, and that is caused by overinflation. So if you have been getting flats with punctures around or tears around the valve, it's from overinflation. That's also an easy fix. If the puncture is on the top side, it's bound to be something from the road. So it could be something that is directly sticking into your tire, in which case, if it's on the top, I always do like a sweep inside the tire. So you just run your hands through. You want to be really careful because something sharp might be sticking through, emptying out if there's any like dirt in your tire, emptying it out. Another thing that you can do is taking like a flashlight or your phone and putting on the flashlight and shining it through to see if you can see any holes or punctures. And sometimes if there's like glass in there, it will be hard to see otherwise. But you know, using that as a tool to your advantage. And the other thing that can cause flats a lot is if your tires are old and have wear. One moment, I'm just going to read this question. For my back tire lost all its air. It started when I was riding, and I think due to riding on wood chips, my back tire lost its air when I came home. So then I took it to the bike shop. They pumped up my tire, and at first my bike was fine, and I checked out my tire again, and the back tire was flat again. What should I do? In that case, by the time you get home, it's flat again, that's a slow leak. So that could be caused by, you know, there was just like a tiny puncture of like a splinter of a wood chip that either like already came out, or maybe it came out by the time you got it home. But I would take that and do the tube in soapy water trick and see if you can find the hole. Otherwise, I would check your tire really carefully, especially on the, like, take it off and check the inside to make sure that there's not another, there's not like a splinter or something poking through. Awesome. So we've learned about types of flats. Now we're talking about tire wear, especially in terms of that producing types of flats. So sometimes it's really, I mean, for the most part, it'll be relatively easy to tell when it's time to change your tires. There is some like, you know, you can get by riding on some pretty worn tires, but this is the type of tire wear that you would see that would lead to a lot of flats. So this is what we call the sidewall of the tire. And this is, you can see it's almost just like netting. You can see through, and so any sort of like gravel and grit could get through there. So when that sort of the integrity of the tire is damaged, that can cause flats. You'll also see, where are my other, demo pieces. This one's not too bad, but a lot of times, so your tire has the sidewall, and then your tire has a bead. The bead is this bottom part here, and that's what helps the tire latch onto the rim. So the bead sits inside the rim, just like that. And it will kind of grip, and as the pressure in the tube will keep it latched under there. So a lot of times the bead will start to wear down and it will look really stringy. So this isn't a particularly good example, but they'll have like strings like this that'll start coming off all along the bead. That's a sign that your tire is getting old, especially if there's like a lot of that. That is something that you could get away with riding a bit more. The main danger signs, I would say, and the thing that you want to be the most careful of are tire bulges. And I will show you an example of that. Cool. So you'll see here, let's see if I can, and actually you'll be able to feel this when you're riding. It'll feel kind of like you'll feel that little kind of like bump. It'll feel almost like you're hitting a rock, but in a cyclical way at the same point. And I mean, it's usually pretty obvious, but you know, it'll look like a little, like, you know, a little like egg shape on your tire. And that is really dangerous because that's a sign of a weak spot in your tire, and you can get a blowout. And let me tell you, that's not a fun way to figure out you need to change your tires. Any sort of, as soon as you see any sign of a bulge in your tire, definitely make sure that you get off that bike and change your tires immediately. Other types of wear. Let's see, on your tires. So you can have what's called dry rot. Dry rot is, let's see if you can tell. Here you see the cracking on the tires. A lot of tires will also, on this part, will also have a wear indicator. I'll see if I can show you on my other tires what that is, but when the tread gets really smooth, when the tire itself looks like it has like a completely flat surface here, it'll look kind of like boxy almost, like you'll lose the roundness. Tires still will have roundness here. That's a good sign. If you look really closely, you can see that this used to have tread and it's all gone. And that's a good sign that this also needs to be replaced. On knobby tires, you'll have the knobs can get kind of like nicked or torn, and that will start to expose your tubes as well. But like I said, the most dangerous thing is really the bulges on the tires. And I think this is also pretty dangerous. You can pretty much just see right through it. This is really bad. And let's see. So here's some other examples. You might be able to see, oh, actually, yeah. So the exposed threads and bead here, that's what I was talking about, where that starts to break down. And that means that like the tires aren't gonna grip the rims as well. You'll see obviously like gashes in your tires. Anytime like a gash like this, you'd be pretty likely to get a flat on the way home if it looked like that. So that's an instance where I always try and keep a dollar bill on my bike for instances like that, because you can take out the tube, put the dollar bill there, and put the tube back in and ride it to a safe place until you can change. It's just like a good, you know, getting yourself somewhere when your tires slashed like that. These dots here are wear indicators. And when those dots are completely flat, you'll know that that your tires are worn enough that you need to change them. Some bikes will also, or some tires will also have colored strips that will appear when your tires are worn. Those are pretty cool. And this is like, over here is more likely what you would see with worn sidewall, where, you know, it kind of gets like a little stringy looking as well, and dry rot with a cracking again. Cool. So how do you actually change your tires and your tube? The first thing that you'll need are tire levers. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing this so you can see me better. And please feel free to ask any questions as we go in the Q&A. If there's anything if you don't understand, feel free to ask. If it's not something I can answer in the course of this workshop, I'm happy to email you. Cool, but tire lever. I like these Pedros ones. There's skinnier ones, there's metal ones. I recommend these plastic Pedros ones because the shape of them is just great. I love these. Usually you'll get them in pairs. It's a little deceiving. I actually almost only ever carry one with me. And I'll explain that as I demo changing a flat, but you'll notice that one side is scooped and one side has this divot here. This side attaches to the spokes, and this side is for scooping out the tire. So a lot of times when you do use two, you'll pull out the tire, and then you'll use one of the tire levers and attach it to the rim here so that it sticks like that. So you'll see this just, you can pull through and then over and it will hold. I almost never have to use this tactic, and I try to not use this tactic, and I'll explain that more in a second. So tire levers, obviously a pump. This is the one that I use on the go if I'm riding anywhere, and you'll see it's a Road Morph, Topeak Road Morph. And I like this one because it has a gauge. It's not a great gauge, but it gives me a sense of how much air pressure is in my tires. Ideally, you'll want a floor pump. These are really, really hard to use to get up to higher pressures. Any sort of small pump, you'll want a floor pump like this. This one has two different sides. This side is for Presta, it's the smaller side, and the side with a wider opening is for Schrader. A lot of pumps will have it integrated into one side. Also has a gauge. Always make sure your pumps have gauges. Cool. So the first thing is, and you know what, the number of times that I've forgotten this and had to struggle along the way, is that the first step to changing your tire is actually to loosen your brakes. So demo on this bike here. Most brakes will have a release, like a little bit of a release mechanism on them that allows you to take a certain amount of tension off, and that will, it will at a base level hold your brakes, for example, at about here, and then this would, it's on these brakes, it's this piece here, and when I open that, it would allow my brakes to expand a little further without totally letting go of the tension. Check your brakes to see what that release mechanism is. For rim brakes, it's usually like a little lever on the side like this. If you have different types of brakes, you might need to like disconnect the brakes if you have V brakes, and but save yourself the trouble and struggling to get your wheel out between your brakes. I have one bike where it's really hard to release the brakes, and that just means every time I take my wheel off, I have to completely deflate my tire in order to get the wheel off. So remember to release your brakes. The next thing that I want to do, taking the tire off or taking the wheel off your bike when it's the rear wheel is a little bit trickier because the chain and all the gears. This bike has a quick release. If your bike doesn't have a quick release, you'll want to carry, usually this will be like single speed bikes. If they're completely bolted down, you'll want to carry a tool, a wrench with you so you can always get your wheel off. Quick releases are really awesome because they allow you to take your wheels off without any tools. Once again, this is the example of a quick release. It'll have this side, and this will open and automatically release some of the tension, and then you turn one of the sides or both of the sides, it doesn't matter, it tensions evenly until you can until you have a little bit of wiggle room here. You can see I'm already able to move this around. The next thing that you want to do, something that I do, this is easier if the bike is straight up, is flipped over the other way, is you really don't want to touch the chain or the gears if possible. It's not good to get, you don't want to get your hands dirty, and also it's not good to get oils from your hand on your chain. So, feel free to play around with your derailleur. This is the derailleur here. Don't force it in any ways, but you'll notice it has a pulley. This pulley tensions your chain. So, and your derailleur will move back, this pulley will move forward, and play around with it. Usually I want to put my thumb somewhere on this big part of the derailleur, or my fingers, and use that as leverage. So I'm pushing against the derailleur itself, and I'm pushing this lever up, and then I'm going to pull this back. And look at all that space I've now created. This can just come out, and then I'm pulling it to the side, and the wheel is off. It really sucks to struggle with a chain and get all caught up in it. This wheel has, this black part is called the dust cap. You can take it off. You don't need to have dust caps. Both types of valves will have them. These are like a nice to have. I always lose mine eventually, and there's no real significant function to them. This is threaded all the way, which means you can see like it has the screw bits on it. And when you have that, a lot of times they'll come with this little piece right here, and that just helps when you're inflating when the tire or when the tube is really flat. It'll help prevent the valve from sinking in to the rim. So if you lose this, it's not a big deal, but make sure you remove it before you change your tube. Oops, there it goes. Something you want to think about is kind of strategy in this. The area where your valve is sitting is going to be the tightest, the part where your tube and your tire are the tightest. So if you want to give yourself the most slack, I go to the opposite side. Now, the thing that's really important here, and something that will just like make your life so much easier, is when I'm sitting with my tire and I'm changing this, I have it straight out from my body. And if I have it this way, it's so much harder. You're going to be like fighting against yourself. But when you have it straight out from your body, the motion that you're going to want to be doing is this. So you'll get a lot more force if you have your tire straight out from your body. So first things first, I put my tire lever pretty much straight down. You don't want to go at it from like this way or this way. It's the thing that you want is to be able to just scoop under that rim. Over the rim and under the bead of that tire. And this can be a little tricky. Sometimes you have to play around with it, and you're kind of like scooping around, seeing what you can get. You can use your thumb to kind of like pull the tire out a little bit. So that you can see the bead exposed. Also, the other thing is, and I didn't do this because this tire is already deflated pretty much, but you want to let out any remaining air in here, because any air in the tire, any air in the tube will create more tension, and it'll be really, really hard to get your tire off. So scooping in here, I get the scoop part under the bead only. I'm really trying not to catch the tube. And then you'll see I'm pulling it down. I want to pull it straight down so that it's now perpendicular. And this is the point at which some people attach this tire lever to a spoke. In this case, I'd want this way back here. And I would put another tire lever that like keeps it so that the tire's over the edge, and the other tire lever I'd push up in here. So the reason why I don't do this is because a lot of times tires are really tight, and putting 2 tire levers under there will make it even tighter. So for the most part, you really just want to use this one tire lever and give yourself a little, that like gives you a little more slack in the tire to work with. Once this is straight down, you know, parallel with the rim, I'm going to take it and I'm going to push away from my body. And the first little bit is also, might be a little sticky. A lot of times the tire might have like kind of like melted into the side of the rim a little bit. So I'm pushing away, and you can see there's a point where it kind of gives, and then you can just scoop it up. And whenever you're working with your tires, you'll want to do one side at a time. So I've taken one side of the tire off completely. You'll see here, and that's just on the outside of the rim here. And this, on the other side, this is still on. If you are just replacing the tube, you can leave this one side of the tire on and just take out the tube by getting the gauge out, oh, sorry, the valve out. And that can be a little tricky sometimes. You want to pull that all the way out, and then the rest of the tube just comes right on out. If you're changing the tire, you would want to take obviously both sides of the tire off. When you're putting the tube back in, so at this point I would check to make sure, is there any flat in this tire? I know that this has just been sitting in my room. I haven't ridden it. That's why over time your tires will get flat if you leave them for long periods of time. So when I put the tube back in, want to make sure that this Presta valve is open, and I'm going to put the Presta side on, and I'm going to lock the valve head on here, so that way it creates a seal so all the air goes inside this valve. I'm going to inflate it just enough so that it has some shape, and I am going to find the opening for the valve, which is here. Put that in first. So you'll notice I put that in first, and then I'll stuff the tire up inside. And after you put the tire inside, what you're really wanting, so you really want it to be up inside. This is more so important when you have a new tube, because they're completely flat and airless, and otherwise they can get twisted. The other thing is you want to make sure that the sides of the tire aren't pinching the tube when you put it back on. So as soon as I get that stuffed all the way inside the tire, the next thing that I do is I'll deflate the tube completely, because like I said, you don't want any sort of like excess tension. So it's all in. I'm going to deflate this tube. Sometimes you might have to like roll the tire a bit. So you'll deflate it. So now remember, the valve is the tightest part. So I want to start with the valve this time, where I'm loading the tire back on by pushing it up and in. and I can get it started like this. In this case, I sit with my tire on my lap, and I have it out in front of me, and I'll go on either side of the valve, and I'll start working the tire in. And when it gets to be about halfway, you'll notice it'll be much harder to load the tire back on. You'll see how I'm holding my hands here. I'm actually using the heel of my hand to roll the tire on, because that creates the least tension. So I'm not like fighting with the tire. If I'm like pulling it up and over, it's gonna make the tire feel tighter. So I'm rolling this on with each hand on either side. And the instinct here will be to take this tire lever and to jam it up in there. I would only use this tire lever as a last resort not only because it's yet another thing that you're like stuffing under the tire. You can also accidentally puncture the tube when you're putting this back on. So most bike mechanics will try to never use tire levers when you are putting the tube back, or when you're putting the tire back on. And in the last minute here, when you get to this part where it's just this little last stretch, I hold the one side of the tire with a hand, keep this side in place, and I use this hand to roll. And sometimes one side will work better than the other. And you'll roll, and it'll be really hard. And you'll see right here, the tube is coming out. So I know that's dangerous. So I want to check that once I get this tire all the way on, and also is probably why it's sticking a little bit. Cool. So I rolled that back on. I want to make sure now the last and most important thing that you should never forget, and everyone eventually does, is you want to peel the sides of the tire back and see, can I see the tube? And you'll notice here I can. And this is dangerous because if I try to inflate the tire, if I try to inflate it with this, like the way it is, this tire is going to get the tube is going to burst. And it's going to sound like a gunshot, and it's scary and awful. So at that point, I'd want to either take the tire off and put the tube back inside, or see if I can get it while the tire's on to seat properly. So when you do this, you go around and you check just like this, pulling the side of the tire back. You want to do that for both sides. And then making sure once that's done, you can fully inflate. Some people will put the wheel back on their bikes first. You can also do this before, especially if you have enough space between your brakes anyways. So same procedure, loading the pump head on, locking it on so it creates a seal, and pump away. And when you're pumping, make sure you have your feet on the pump itself. It'll save you a lot of grief. And make sure that you are pulling this all the way up, giving yourself the most force, and pushing this all the way down, up and down. You want to make sure that your gauge on your tire is it'll push up and down and fall back down. If it shoots all the way up, that means that there's a bad connection, especially if it like shoots up to like 100 after like 2 pumps. And you'll want to disconnect. You'll want to disconnect the pump head and then reconnect it. You don't want the pump head at an angle, but you want the pump head to sit as firmly and as deeply on the valve as possible. So, sorry, going a little over here. I think that pretty much covers it. If anyone has any last minute questions in the last couple minutes, otherwise, thank you for joining me for AIR. And next time we'll be covering brakes.